Hi class, in this lecture we are going to look at late adulthood and death, the final stages of development. So when it comes to later adulthood, we kind of consider this one of the newest life periods to be studied, and it's because people are living a little bit longer. So we define later adulthood as starting about the age 65, and major developmental tasks there, like in any other stage, are determined by those biological, social, and personal factors, um, social norms, and what expectations arrive at this stage of life. Of course, are key tasks that we have to overcome. And in many ways, the older adulthood is kind of described as a role-less role. And basically, what that means is that as we tend to get older, society kind of tends to value us less. And so there's less of a place for the elderly in culture. Now, that's not true for all cultures, but in our American culture, we seem to kind of neglect this stage of life as when it comes to, societal functions there. And, one of the key reasons for that is because a part of getting old and dying means that our body is degenerating. And so, we have a lot of physical decline, and there's increased awareness, that your life is coming to an end. So, many elderly people, they try to find meaning and value in their life. And so, like I said, this is one of the newest stages of development because people are living longer. So, we are seeing higher life expectancy rates. And, when it comes to us here in America, we have generally a very high life expectancy rate. When you look at the map up here, you see that the greens, especially those darker greens, tend to be the countries with the highest life expectancy rates, and then those reds and blacks are the lowest. So because of technology and because of just I was going to say better food choices, but with fast food, I'm not sure if that one's correct. But just because of the way, the nature of life and life changing and the natures of our body changing and social expectations and just life changing, technology being the key there, we have seen life expectancy increase in the United States. And it's interesting because, it's normal for most Americans to live into their 80s, 90s, maybe even 100s. Yet, if we look back to ancient Rome, we see that that life expectancy rate was about 20 years old. In the Middle Ages, it was around 33. And then during the 1900s, so the 20th century, we see, those rates rising. So in 1900, 48 was, the average age of death. And then we see in 2000, it was 78. So, once again, 1900s, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and we had a lot of breakthrough in medical technology and just things as simple as, bathing, sanitation, indoor plumbing, all of that played a role too in helping increase those life expectancy rates. So when it comes to looking across the globe, we see that the U.S. is fifth in comparison to 224 nations. So we see Japan, Singapore, Australia. They seem to have the highest life expectancy rates. And what's this say down here? Oh, but we see that here in probably the next decade or so that once again those rates are going to rise even more. And so we see the diversity of elderly is going to rise to, those rates are going to rise too. And so it's kind of leading to an idea that there is going to be more of a social need for elderly people, because the longer people live, the more they're going to want to be active and doing things. So basically, just to summarize what I have said, is that medical technologies have led to life expectancy rates rising. Just technology, industrialization, and better qualities of life, better economic choices, and in many ways, kind of better food choices. Even with all the fast food, we still have more variety and more options for food than our ancestors did. And so, all of that contributes. And then, when it comes to the poorer parts of the world, we see that life expectancy rates are really low, meaning that people seldom live past their 40s, and that's poorest parts of like the African continent and the Middle East there. So, in looking at life expectancy, it leads us to the question of, is there a maximum lifespan? Meaning, if we could avoid all accidents, all diseases, all, any little missteps like that along the way, is there then a set date so that we know that humans can indeed live to be this age, if that makes sense, guys? Basically, what that means is that we're looking at how long we can live. What's that possible lifespan, and when can we, generally expect it to end? So we set that number at about 125 years, and we say 97. The longest living woman was 122. And I want to say that there might have been a woman that just passed recently who was very close to that. And then when it comes to this idea of a maximum lifespan, because we can't really say, well, we're going to live to be this many years, because it's Murphy's Law. If something's going to happen, it always happens, and there's really no way to totally avoid accidents and diseases. Maybe if you lock yourself in your house for your whole life, but I don't see how you would. I don't see that being possible too. So a lot of scientists kind of reject that idea that there is indeed a maximum lifespan. However, though, we do predict that life expectancy rates will continue to grow. And so we see these new kind of generations called centenarians, and then, who live to be 100 or older. And then if you make it past 110, you're a super centenarian. And so when it comes to theories on why we age, there are three main ones. The first one is the program theory of aging. Basically what that is that we have these kind of built-in clocks. We have our own little self-destruct clocks that are built into us, right? And eventually that timer is going to go off. And, when it comes, and eventually that timer is going to go off. And along with this idea of theories of aging, we know that a lot of it has to do with, cellular degeneration. It just seems that for a cell, our cells are constantly being born and reborn and copied and pasted. And so, eventually that wears out. And as far as science goes right now, we can't really explain why that happens, but if we know that if we can find a way to keep cells from degenerating, we then would have that answer to longevity and pretty much everlasting life. So that's always kind of interesting to think about. We also have the evolutionary theory of aging, and that kind of relates to what I'm saying, because we are talking about genetics. And so basically with evolutionary theory of aging, with evolution, you're seeing one thing growing and adapting to an environment. And so in that growth and adaptation, with genes, you're going to have genes that are less desirable, and eventually they're just going to die off because they're not being passed along. And so, those stronger genes are going to be able to and keep reproducing themselves. But like I just said, eventually that cycle wears itself out, and damage to genes and other cells is our ability to withstand that decreases as we get older. So that leads us to that last and third theory of aging, random damage theory. And just being a part of life, living means that we get damage to our bodies. And so because of that, we get deteriorations. And so things like bodily processes, so genetic mutations, metabolism, damages from the environment, radiation, pollution, lifestyles, injury, all of that creates damage to our bodies. That some of it, of course, some of that can be reversed, some of that can be repaired. But once again, guys, eventually the longer our bodies are on this planet, the more damage they take in. We have like it's like that maximum capacity rate. There is a point where our bodies are just like too much, can't do it anymore, right? Then we have these ideas of free radicals, and these are basically just they're these unstable oxygen molecules. So they kind of float around, ping pong around, and they penetrate, they collide with other molecules, and so that causes damage to the cells. That would be things like cancer, diabetes, arthritis. And then of course we have to worry about the amount of food that we take into our body. So overeating causes damage, so we have to be careful about our calorie intake and our calorie restriction. So calorie restriction is you want to reduce those number of calories you're taking in, but you still want to get the proper number of nutrients. And so we think that if we can maintain that healthy diet that is mindful of that factor, calorie restriction, then we can possibly reduce free radicals. And then in some instances we think that maybe that in a way can help increase life expectancy too. And then we also see that with calorie restriction, that in some cases it's a good thing because it helps us avoid degenerative and chronic diseases, things like cardiovascular diseases. So things affecting your heart. And then we see in Okinawa, Japan, where we have the highest life expectancy rates, that they have really nutritious diets. So their diets are full of a lot of nutrition, whereas kind of here in the United States, we tend to focus a lot on, a lot of people make their diet out of fast food, processed food, which is high in calories and low in nutritional values. And so that's why we see a lot of heart disease, a lot of diabetes, and a lot of issues with obesity and all the things that come along with that here in America. And then we have this idea of telomeres, and telomeres, back to what I'm saying, guys, is that our cells are able to reproduce, divide, replicate, and they pretty much, they're always doing that throughout waking consciousness, sleeping consciousness, whatever. Our cells are always working and moving and doing something inside of us. And so we know that eventually that's going to stop. And so they've done studies in that even if given a steady, proper supply of nutrients, they maintain a constant temperature, we still see that cellular degenerations, except for stem cells. Intrinsic stem cells seem to be able to divide more than a normal cell, where do before that telomere shortening, and that's what we call that. When the amount of times that that cell can divide or replicate is that telomere shortening. And we know that, and so the faster it does it, the more it's degenerating our cells, right? That's the idea behind the shortening there. And because the more we see those cells dividing in that telomere shortening time decreasing, then that kind of ups your risk for death. And of course, once again, stress can lead to premature aging. Low socioeconomic statuses contribute to this shortening, and that leads to premature aging. So that's another idea behind this telomere shortening, is that kind of speeds up aging and it creates premature aging. So hopefully that makes sense. And then of course, once again, this is all related to the longevity of our genes. And when it comes, and genes themselves are not directly dictating that aging process. It seems to have to do more with cellular degeneration on other parts of our body, different types of those microscopic cells inside of us, not the genes, right? However, they don't exist in isolation. Our bodies, our systems, and everything inside of them, they all work together. So genes don't directly dictate the aging process, but they do have an influence on it. Because once again, if you have the gene for a type of disease or a certain type of, body type, that would lead to things like obesity, or maybe even, not anorexia, not eating enough, things like inbreeding, create genetic mutations. And of course that all has an effect on the aging process. And then genes influence the reserve capacity, and so that reserve capacity refers to our organs. So basically, our bodily systems, our organs, they can continue to function even when they start to decline. So that reserve capacity, basically, it means that we can kind of maintain functioning for a while, and our genes play a role in that, because it's going to predict how people, how those that came before us in our bloodline, kind of how genetics related to the diseases they got, the age of their death, and things of that nature. Larger reserve capacities can increase the likelihood of surviving long enough to produce and raise offspring. A fringe benefit of that is that we have a greater ability to withstand that random damage, the effects of that random damage. And so people who have a higher genetic predisposition, meaning they have those genes inside of them, they're not necessarily activated, that but they have them. So it seems like they have a greater capacity to live longer, and because that random damage takes longer to affect their organs and their body system. And so we do see that longevity tends to run in families. So that's a little confusing there, because it does sound like genes directly dictate the aging process. But once again, even with genetics, there are still ways that you can maybe change that gene and avoid it. So I'm thinking of something like, if you have, your family has high risk of cancer, or so highly susceptible to getting cancer, highly susceptible to getting something like diabetes. Well, those are two things that with diet, exercise, lifestyle change, you could probably avoid ever having that gene activated and actually getting that disease. All right, and so in addition to kind of those biological, physical kind of degenerative things that are going on as we age. We also have those mental, those social, emotional, and those spiritual kind of things going on too, just like we have with all the other stages, right? So it's at this stage of development that Eric Erickson, and his 8 stages of development, we've talked about them all throughout class, right, guys? So at this stage is when we have that task of working through this idea of integrity in despair. And so basically, integrity, it's about maintaining, not giving up, kind of keeping that positive attitude in life, and kind of working until the day you die kind of mentality. Because as we tend to get older, a lot of people start to struggle with that, because like I said at the beginning, society, in our society, we tend to not value the elderly as much because we don't see them as serving a purpose. That's kind of capitalism, as we all, and that's just the way all societies are set up, is that all members have a purpose and a function. And you get to a point where you don't have a purpose and a function, you kind of become obsolete. You're no longer useful to that society, right? In many cultures, though, the elderly are still valued because, they have lived the longest, they've had the most life experiences, so they are a plethora of knowledge that they can provide to their community. So this is where technology and our American kind of westernized lifestyles and the types of foods that we are used to eating comes into play, and is a negative thing, because we see more mental deterioration in Western societies with things like dementia and Alzheimer's than we do, say, in poorer societies, or say in societies where not necessarily what not poorer societies. My bad, guys, I misspoke. But in societies more where they're more self-sustainable, so they have more of a healthier diet. Those older individuals tend to keep their mental facilities longer. That's what I'm trying to say. And so, in realizing that your body's breaking down, you are eventually going to die. When you're in your 20s, when you're in your 30s, when you're a child, or even now, and it being with me being in my 40s, I know death is inevitable, but hopefully, I've still got a while to go, right? Well, once you start getting into, your 60s, 70s, 80s, that idea that, it's going to eventually come, and it's getting closer every day, weighs upon people. So, they can reach this moment of despair. So, it's kind of like an elderly or a late adulthood life crises, because it's like, okay, I'm gonna die. It's gonna be here. I don't have any more value in society. I'm just gonna sit in my house and wait for death. Or do you say, wait a minute, you know, it's not over yet. Nobody's rang the bell. This fight's still going. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to enjoy my time and try to continue to give back to my society and my family and loved one as much as I can. And so, of course, that greater psychological well being comes from choosing those more integrity tasks, those more, serving your community tasks. And we see more older American, or not Americans, but more older individuals reflect more of these integrity themed life goals more so than we see with younger Americans. And once again, it's like, because once you get to that point in life, there's a lot of it where it's just kind of relax. You've got it, you've done it. Now it's time to sit back and enjoy life. So at this point in life, we usually tend to get really into those life reviews. I think it's a good point at any stage of development in our life that we do a life review, because that's ways that we get insight into what we've done right, insight to what we've done wrong, and we find those new goals, new tasks, new way of accomplishing our dreams. And so what I like to do is every year on my birthday, and like I make my husband do it too. Did you hear that, guys? I said I make him because I do have to force him. But every year we would do life reviews on our birthdays, and then we do it on our anniversary too. And so, it helps. We're not perfect, but doing that definitely helps give us a deeper insight into not only our own psyches and inner selves or shadows and stuff like that, but it gives us more insight into the life that we have together and are creating together. So, it's a great, so, life reviews are always a good thing. And, like I said, it's fun. And when you can have someone else you can involve in that too, because that's the thing about being human. We're social creatures. We want to share things with each other, and and it's those memories we make that we really want to share, right, guys? All right. And so we know that throughout any stage of life, we always have those developmental timetables, we have those developmental tasks, those developmental processes, and Erickson talks about all of those. I would say probably out of all the psychologists that we've looked into, Erickson is probably the leader on being most comprehensive and thorough in his stages of development. I like Freud a lot, but he's a little complicated when it comes to those psychosexual stages of development, right? So we know that as we tend to get older, we've already have everything, we've already accomplished everything, so it's really hard to keep setting life goals. Hence where that integrity and despair comes in. So a lot of times we see, especially with people living longer, we tend to see more elderly people getting involved in like leisure and hobbies and things of that nature, or like I said, more kind of social servant type roles. So they're like working more with the homeless, or types of populations that need more social services, if that makes sense, guys. And so a lot of that has to do with getting that getting meaning out of life, and then some of it has to do with closure too. So maybe there are some things you haven't done, and so you get to be in your 60s and you're like, well, I made it to 65, so let me go and get that bucket list checked out. That's what that's talking about with closure there, guys. That's a good way to describe that. And then, of course, those developmental processes, selection, optimization, compensation. We still need all of these later in life, meaning, we still need to be discerning. We still need to be doing our best. And we see this idea of compensation becomes, it gives a greater, it takes on a greater meaning. And basically, it's that idea of stopping to smell the roses. Don't rush life. Don't go so fast. Take those few minutes to slow down, because when you can slow down in life, that's when you can learn to appreciate it more. And I can't, I'm not at this life stage yet, so I can only speculate, but I can kind of see how I can imagine in 20 years, hopefully I've accomplished way more things in my life. I will be in late adulthood, and I can see how I could be at a point to be like, okay, I don't have to keep working as hard as I did 20 years ago. I've actually built what I wanted to build in my life, and now I do get a little time to enjoy it. That's harder for us to see at these younger ages because we're still building, right, guys? And no matter what stage of life you're at, you'll find, even in late adulthood, this happens. You'll find that sometimes you build things and you have to knock them down. Maybe other people knock them down, you have to knock them down, whatever, castles will crumble. And and a lot of that is due to our life choices, due to our mindsets, due to the things we choose to focus our energy on. But it's all a part of life, because in that building, tearing down, rebuilding, that's how we learn about ourselves, we learn about others, and ultimately we do optimize our lives so that we live to be the best versions of ourselves possible. So then by the time we do get into our 60s, those little crazy life crises that happen and come up, they tend, if you keep the drama out of your life, then you will get to have a lot more appreciation for life in your elderly years. All right, so that then, self regulatory capacities that definitely relate. That's a good segue into those. So, our self regulatory capacities, that is, our ability to keep going, our ability to see challenges as new learning experiences. And so, our personalities and personality traits play a big role in that. Life shapes and molds and changes us as we go through each stage of development, as we go through each day, right, guys? But for the most part, our main personality traits seem to stay pretty stable. But of those big five factors, we see extroversion, openness. Those are ones that kind of start to decline. And a lot of that just has to do with maybe our family and our social kind of environments. That's what I was looking for there. Sometimes, health, when you have older individuals that have health problems, it's harder to get out there and explore new things. So they may tend to become a little more introverted. And then we see extroverted people. They tend to be more happier, more satisfied with their life, because at every stage of life they're kind of carpe diem, seize the day type mentalities. People who are a little more neurotic and anxious, they tend to have more negative emotions. They're a little bit more stressful. So those, as those people get into later adulthood, these are the ones that are the personalities that are going to struggle with it more. And I think that's a good place to stop and think about our rules as not late adulthood, as individuals not in that stage of a development. What can we do to support our friends and families that are in late adulthood? And just, listen, care, and show respect, appreciation. That's what we can do for anybody at any stage of life. And, that helps make their life better. And in ways, that help makes our life better too. And a good thing about that is really when it comes to being old, I think there's a myth that maybe people get old and grouchy, and or they get old and they're more stressed out, more anxious. And we tend to see that's not true. It seems to be that older individuals are actually, like I said, they've gone through all of it. They're done with all the crap we have to go through, right, guys? So they tend to be a little happier. And I'm sure, having kids out of the house adds into that too. You don't have to worry about the drama of any of that, right? So then, with continuing with self regulatory capacities, we see that older individuals, they finally, for the most part, and we get to that age of life and we finally figured out how to not let that negative stuff get to us. We found out how to, control our anger better, how to just let things run off our backs better. And this is why we really should value the elderly more in our society, because I think just through this lecture we're seeing that, even at this last stage of life, it's that kind of emotional and mental what's a good word? Support. That's the only one I can think of right now. It's that emotional and mental support that elderly people can give us because of their experiences and because of some of the things that they figured out. That would really help a lot of younger adults, especially during adolescence and early adulthood when our hormones are just all over the place and we go from angry to sad to mad to happy to giddy to scared and like 0.03 seconds, and that that can make navigating life very very hectic, very scary. That leads to those delinquent behaviors. And I will add this in: studies do show that children, adolescents who tend to have a strong, supportive elderly figure in their life, so someone who spends a lot of time with their grandparents and especially out in nature, that those children tend to, be less tumultuous during adolescence and young adulthood, and they kind of develop into more well-rounded, healthy individuals. And then what we see is that even though, we have this kind of emotional regulations, we seem to kind of explode with that towards the end of our life, that really is in stark contrast to those, those physical and cognitive capabilities, right, guys? Because, as we're getting these kind of better emotional states, our bodies and our brains are breaking down on us. And like I said, it's just because, they've had a whole, at that stage of life, you've gone through almost all of it. You know how to avoid upsetting situations. You know how to handle upsetting situations. And then, socio-emotional selective theory is that because we're at a stage of life that we know we're is coming, we know our lives are coming to an end, that we're just not going to waste time on negativity anymore. And that's really, I think, the main key there. And once again, at any stage of life, not negative things are going to happen, stress is going to happen, but learning to deal with that in ways that just doesn't totally turn us into those negative people, those negative thoughts that we want to have. Nobody wants to be stuck in those states of mind, states of being, right? So, when we can learn to change our mental state, something bad happens, okay, bad things happen. When you get it in your head and focus more on the solution and overcoming that bad thing instead of dwelling on the negativity, your life does change in more positive and productive ways, right? And then we also see that this increase in kind of emotional regulation has to do with the amygdala, and it sees that the amygdala, there's greater activation, it's greater activation more towards the positive side of things, because usually amygdala, that's what fear and stress runs off of. And so it's very interesting. It's kind of it relates to that idea of brain plasticity. Our brain has this ability to kind of mold and shape and restructure itself for the most part. Of course, we know there's some brain damage, degenerative diseases that's just too much for our brains to repair itself. But basically, by that ability for the brain to be plastic, moldable, meldable, is in the amygdala. There is that it's kind of like the amygdala is getting kind of rewired, is I guess what I'm trying to say there. So it's getting rewired, and instead of being in that survival mode of constant fight or flight, your brain you're now at a point to where your brain has kind of, that part of your brain has changed, so that you are able to focus more on the positive and the solution sides there. So that comes with coping skills, how we deal with stress in our lives. We have problem focused coping skills, and this is when, a direct response that is focused on a solution. And then we have emotional focus, which, with emotional focus, I think that's when stress, something negative happens. We're all only human. We tend to go to that emotional response first, and it doesn't matter if it's negative or positive, we're going to go to that emotional response. And so, with emotional focused coping skills, we're looking at reducing our reaction of those negative emotions. So, it's about changing those negative emotions, those negative thoughts, so that we can, in essence, change that stressful event that's going on. And then we have found, studies have found that problem focused coping, it allows us to adjust better over time, whereas with emotional focused coping, we tend to have more of an escapism. It's kind of more of a denial, repression type of coping, which is basically not coping with it at all. And so, problem focused with positive emotional responses is always the best way to cope. And then once again, we just see that as we get older and reach the later stages of our life, that we tend to get more of those emotional problem focused coping skills. And then we see that, you know, I think it's funny, it says younger adults tend to favor problem focused coping skills. And, I would like to know the age groups there, because once again, adolescence, and early adulthood, we really have no control over that, because, we still have so much hormonal regulation and growth going on, and our bodies and our brains haven't fully developed yet. I would say we're a little more on the emotional side then. And so sorry that is so tiny, guys. So, I'll basically just read this off to you so you guys know everything instead of paraphrasing like I usually do. So, emotional health and self evaluation. Emotional health is a common expectation is that given accumulating social and physical losses, older people should be less satisfied with life and experience more depression. In reality, life satisfaction is as high or higher in later life than in earlier periods, even among centurions. Depression, we know that is a condition in which people experience the following symptoms for 2 weeks or longer: a depressed mood and a loss of interest in usual activities, and other symptoms, including feelings of worthlessness, difficulty in concentrating or making decisions, fatigue, psychomotor agitation or retardation, sleep problems, weight change, suicidal thoughts. When more symptoms are present, the condition is considered to be major depression. Fewer symptoms are considered minor depression. Contrary to popular impressions, the rate of major depression in the elderly is low, about 1 to 5%. Minor depression affects about 15% of this population. These numbers do not vary significantly from those of younger age groups. Risk factors for depression in the elderly include physical and cognitive impairment, ethnicity, with Hispanics having slightly higher rates of depression than other ethnic groups. And then when we look at sex, we see females have higher rates, and then people who are in lower social economic statuses tend to experience more depression. We see that depression and other forms of emotional distress may be less common in older adults because they decrease longevity, and those prone to the disorder are no longer alive. In addition, some stressful events associated with depression, such as the death of a spouse, or more one-time events in later life, And as they are not as unexpected, they are easier to adjust to. So basically, what that means is that, um, as you get older and you know that these kind of things are going to happen, your ability to get depressed and stay upset about it for too long kind of changes. Once again, it goes back to that integrity. It's not that you don't miss your spouse, of course, and of course those are those cases where people have been together for, oh goodness, decades, and one passes, and then within a few hours, minutes, days, weeks, the other one will pass. We see that with animals too. I find that very interesting. Sometimes people will have an animal, and once they pass, their animal doesn't live very long past that. Interesting stuff there. And so our ability to know that those kind of things are going to happen and to cope with those, once again, that increases, so we don't take more of that emotional focused outlook on life, especially when it comes to those stressful, more negative type things. All right. We'll continue on there. In addition, older adults strong emotional self regulation skills, versatile coping repertoires, and religious involvement may result in them dealing more effectively with stress, which helps them fend off depression. While the rate is low, depression is a serious mental health problem and is the leading cause of emotional suffering in later life. Researchers also caution that the rate of depression may be underestimated in older adulthood. This is because common complaints in adulthood, such as difficulty in concentration, sleeping problems, are also symptoms of depression, and it takes considerable diagnostic skills to determine whether or not these are symptomatic of depression, meaning, we don't know if it's depression, dementia, or if it's something else, so it's hard to determine. And a lot of mental disorders are what we call, I can't, the name just escaped me. Oh my gosh, guys, I'm so sorry. I can't think of the word right now. It must be that old age hitting me, huh? But most mental disorders, they come in, like if you have one, you don't just have one. They come in pairs. So if you have depression, you may have like an eating disorder too, or you can have depression and you can have bipolar disorder, or depression and schizophrenia, or depression and antisocial personality. It's like I can remember what the freaking word is. It means I dictic or something. No, that's the wrong word. It's something like that. Sorry, I'll stop. All right, continuing on. So the underdetection of depression prolongs suffering and increases the risk of suicide. Although most depressed individuals do not commit suicide, the majority of individuals who do were depressed. In older adults, about 85% of suicides are committed by individuals suffering from depression. Older Caucasian males are the most common suicide victims in many countries. Fortunately, if detected, depression can be effectively treated using antidepressant medications or psychotherapy. And then we also have self-evaluations that comes into play when it comes to our emotional health, our self-esteem. So self-evaluations or feeling of self-worth tend to remain high in old age. This may be the result of the tendency to focus on positive information and memories. In addition, older adults tend to rely more on assessment of self-worth based on inner definitions, how one feels about oneself, while younger adults are more reliant on external validation, so how others feel about them, social acceptance. So when we get to older, so as we develop more into older adults, our opinion of ourselves, our self-concept becomes more important than, society's and others' self-concept. And we also, well, right there, that also the gap between idea and actual self tend to be smaller in older adulthoods, resulting in the elderly feeling better about how they turn out. The decline in self-esteem in later adulthood may reflect a shift towards greater modesty, not less self-acceptance. The elderly tend to be more willing to acknowledge their faults and limitations. A reduction in narcissism, the tendency towards excessive self love and self affirmation in older adults, is consistent with this shift.